"Your son isn't dead," whispered Billionaire's daughter to Biker. What he discovered changed everything. The man kneeling in front of the small grave looked like he could kill someone with his bare hands, 6'4", arms covered in tattoos, a leather vest with patches that said iron verdicts. Everything about him screamed danger. But he was crying like a lost child. Waverly Ashford watched from behind an old oak tree at Oak Ridge Cemetery. She pulled her hood tighter against the February cold and tried to control her breathing. 3 weeks ago, she had never worn the same clothes twice. Now her jeans had holes she didn't pay for, and her boots came from a donation bin. She was 17. She had $47 in her pocket. And she knew something that could change this man's life forever. The gravestone read, Theo Marcus Mercer, beloved forever. Second ceremony, February 3, 2025. Second ceremony. Waverly had researched it at the public library. Dominic Mercer had buried his son twice. The first funeral was in July, right after the car accident that killed the boy and his mother. The second was 11 days ago. A ceremony of closure, the news articles said. A father who couldn't let go. But the boy in that grave wasn't dead. Waverly knew this because 5 days ago she found Theo hiding in an abandoned warehouse. And 12 hours ago she brought him a can of soup she stole from a shelter. The kid had rope marks on his wrists. He coughed blood. And every night, he cried for his daddy. Theo had escaped from the people who took him on the same day his father held that second funeral. While Dominic was saying goodbye to a lie, his son was running through the streets of Chicago, begging to be found. Now Waverly stood 15 feet away from a grieving giant, holding a plastic Iron Man toy with chipped paint. Theo had pressed it into her hand with trembling fingers. "Show my dad," he had whispered. "He'll know it's me." Waverly's heart pounded. The man in front of her could snap her in half without trying. He led a motorcycle club that police called dangerous. But a 7-year-old boy was dying in the cold, a boy whose father thought he was dead. She counted to 10. Then she stepped out from behind the tree. Snow crunched under Waverly's boots as she walked toward the man. Each step felt like a mile. Her legs wanted to run the other way, but she kept moving. 3 weeks ago, running away was all she knew how to do. Waverly Ashford was the daughter of Preston Ashford, founder of Ashford Technologies. Her father was worth $4.2 billion. She had grown up in a mansion with 12 bedrooms, personal chefs and bodyguards who followed her everywhere. She had been seen her entire life. Photographers, security cameras, tutors, people who wanted her money or her name or her connections. Then she found out the truth about her father. Preston Ashford gave speeches about protecting American children. He donated to charities. He smiled for cameras at fundraisers. But behind closed doors, he funded juvenile detention centers that locked up kids for profit. Children went in for small mistakes and came out broken. And her father got richer every single day. Waverly couldn't stay in that house one more minute, so she left. No phone, no credit cards, just cash from her dresser and clothes she could carry. On the streets of Chicago, nobody looked at a dirty teenager in an old hoodie. For the first time in her life, Waverly was invisible. And being invisible showed her things she never saw before. Like Theo. She found him 5 days ago, hiding between moldy boxes in a warehouse basement. He was so thin she could count his ribs. His lips were blue. His eyes were too big for his face. He whispered an address to her, 1847 Crescent Road. Waverly looked it up at the library. The address belonged to Dominic Mercer, Sergeant-at-Arms of the Iron Verdicts Motorcycle Club, father of a boy who died in a car accident last July. But that boy was alive, coughing, starving, terrified. And now Waverly was 10 feet away from his father. "Your son is not dead, sir." The words came out cracked. The wind almost took them away. Dominic's head snapped up. His eyes were red and swollen. His face shifted from grief to threat in half a second. "Get out of here, girl." His voice was low and rough, a warning. Waverly didn't move. Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out the plastic Iron Man toy and held it in front of her like a shield. "Theo gave me this. He said you would know." The color drained from Dominic's face. He stared at the toy like he was seeing a ghost. Where? The word got stuck in his throat. Where did you get that? That was buried with him, in the first ceremony, in July. No, it wasn't. Waverly's voice grew stronger. Theo held onto this toy for 7 months. The people who took him tried to take everything else, but he never let go of this. 5 days ago, he put it in my hand and said, "Show my dad. He'll know it's me." Dominic stood up, all 6'4" of him, 240 pounds of muscle and ink and rage. "Tell me everything," he said, "right now." Waverly told him everything. She talked fast because the cold was biting through her thin hoodie. She talked fast because Dominic's eyes burned into her like fire. She talked fast because somewhere across the city, a little boy was waiting. "Theo told me about the accident," she said. "He remembers the crash. He remembers his mom not moving. Then a paramedic came, blonde hair, scar on his chin, calm voice. The man said he was going to help. He gave Theo an injection." Dominic's jaw tightened. That's the last thing Theo remembers before waking up in a basement. There were other kids there. They moved him from house to house. The people who took him kept saying the same thing. "If you tell anyone, we'll kill your father." Waverly watched the veins in Dominic's neck pulse. "He escaped 11 days ago," she continued. "The same day you held the second funeral. While you were trying to say goodbye, he was running through the streets trying to find you." Dominic made a sound that wasn't quite human. Something between a growl and a sob. "Why that day?" he asked. "Why did he run that day?" "Because they showed him a news article. Picture of you crying at the cemetery. They told him, 'See? Your dad already forgot you. He made another funeral. You don't exist anymore.'" Waverly paused. Theo thought it was his last chance. He thought if he didn't run right then, he would disappear forever. Dominic stood completely still. Only his hands moved, opening and closing into fists. "Where is he now?" "An old warehouse on the south side. Wexler and Sons. There's a service entrance in the back and stairs to the basement. 3rd door on the left." Dominic already had his phone out. "Judge, it's me. I need everyone, every member, every prospect, every ally. Wexler Warehouse, South Zone, now." Waverly heard a voice on the other end asking questions. "My son might be alive. I know how it sounds. But I'm holding his Iron Man toy, the one that was supposed to be buried with him. And this girl knows things only Theo would know." Another pause. "Thank you, brother. Thank you." He hung up and looked at Waverly with an intensity that made her step back. "You're coming with me. You're going to take me to him. Have you ever been on a motorcycle?" Waverly had never been within 10 feet of one. But she nodded anyway. The Harley roared through Chicago like a beast unchained. Waverly held on tight, her arms wrapped around Dominic's massive frame. The wind cut through her hoodie like knives. Her eyes watered. Her fingers went numb. But she didn't let go. 15 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of Wexler and Sons. The building looked dead. Broken windows, crumbling bricks, graffiti covering every surface. Dominic killed the engine. "Stay behind me," he said. "Don't make a sound until I tell you." They moved through the service entrance. The smell hit Waverly first. Mold, urine, rot. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The walls seemed to close in around them. Dominic pulled out a flashlight. "3rd door on the left?" Waverly nodded. They reached the basement. A long hallway stretched before them, lined with old storage rooms. Most doors hung open, revealing nothing but trash and shadows. The 3rd door on the left was blocked by a rusted metal shelf. Dominic grabbed it with both hands and ripped it away from the wall. The metal screamed as it bent. "Theo!" His voice echoed through the corridor. "Theo, it's Daddy." Silence. The new eyes so quiet Waverly almost missed it. A small voice. "Daddy?" Dominic made a sound she would never forget. Half roar, half sob. He pushed through the door and stopped. In the corner of the room, buried under newspapers and cardboard and a blanket too thin for February, was a boy. Too small for 7 years old. Too pale. Too still. but alive. "You're not real," Theo whispered. His voice was barely there. "Daddy's at home. Daddy thinks I'm dead. The bad guys told me." Dominic didn't move closer. He knelt down right where he stood. "Theo Marcus Mercer," he said, his voice breaking. "Born March 3rd, 2017. Loves Iron Man. Hates peas but eats them if I pretend they're kryptonite. Has a birthmark on his left shoulder shaped like a lightning bolt." Theo's eyes went wide. "Say the words, Daddy. If you're real, say the words." Dominic's tears fell freely now. "Crows fly together." "And never leave one behind," Theo finished. Then the boy ran. He crossed the room in 3 heartbeats and crashed into his father's arms. The sound started like distant thunder. Then it grew, engines, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Waverly followed Dominic up the stairs. He carried Theo wrapped in his leather jacket, the boy's face pressed against his chest. When they stepped outside, the parking lot had transformed. Motorcycles everywhere, men and women in leather climbing off their bikes. Patches from different chapters. Iron Verdicts Chicago, Iron Verdicts Milwaukee. Allied clubs from across the Midwest. 70, 80, 100. More kept coming. A man in his 60s approached. Gray beard, hard eyes that had seen decades of trouble. His patch read President. "Judge," Dominic said. Judge looked at the boy in Dominic's arms, at the rope marks on Theo's thin wrists, at the terrified eyes peeking above the leather jacket. "My God, Crows," Judge's voice cracked. "It's really him. It's him, and someone in the emergency system declared my son dead, gave me another body to bury, and sold him to traffickers." Judge turned to face the crowd that kept growing. "Brothers, this is Theo Mercer, son of our sergeant at arms. He was stolen, trafficked, declared dead. But he's alive tonight because this girl," he pointed at Waverly, "had the courage to speak up." 147 faces turned toward her. Waverly wanted to disappear. She wanted to turn into smoke and drift away. But she stood there, chin up, because Theo had needed her to be visible, and she had been. An older woman approached, Dr. Nina Castellanos, a trauma surgeon married to one of the members. She examined Theo without ever taking him from his father's arms. "Early pneumonia," she said quietly to Dominic. "Severe malnutrition, 3 broken fingers that healed wrong. Cigarette burns on his forearm. Mild hypothermia." She paused. "He needs a hospital. But first, we need to know who we can trust." Dominic held his son tighter. The boy who was supposed to be dead was breathing against his chest. Alive. Real. But the people who took him were still out there. The warehouse became a war room within hours. Someone brought generators. Someone brought folding tables and laptops. Coffee appeared in thermal bottles. Extension cords snaked across the concrete floor. 183 members of the Iron Verdicts and their allies had answered the call. Now they had work to do. A man named Spector sat across from Waverly at one of the tables. He was in his 50s with tired eyes and a calm voice that made her want to talk. 20 years Chicago homicide, he said when she asked. Got kicked out for reporting corruption. The club gave me a family when the department took mine. He asked questions for 2 hours. Every detail Theo had shared. Every word. Every description. When he finished, Spector addressed the group. The paramedic. Theo described a blond man with a scar on his chin. Calm voice. Gave him an injection that knocked him out. That's our starting point. Another member stepped forward. They called him Glitch, the club's digital expert. His fingers flew across a laptop keyboard. Paramedic on duty the night of the Mercer accident last July. Russell Thorne. 23 years with Chicago Fire Department. Blonde. Scar on his chin from a fire in 2015. The room went silent. There's more, Glitch continued. His face looked pale in the laptop light. Thorne has a pediatric death rate 41% above departmental average. All car accidents or house fires. All closed casket. Waverly felt sick. Every single one of those death certificates was signed by the same medical examiner, Dr. Leonard Marsh, Average time between Thorne declaring death and Marsh signing off? Less than 3 hours. Normal procedure takes 24 to 48. Judge stepped closer. So Thorne declares kids dead at the scene. Marsh makes it official without questions. But where do the bodies come from? Dominic buried someone in July. Glitch typed faster. Marsh has worked at the county morgue for 19 years. He has access to unidentified and unclaimed bodies. I'm seeing a pattern here. In the last 14 years, 23 bodies of unidentified children were cremated under his authorization, always within days of one of Thorne's declared deaths. The meaning settled over the room like poison. They weren't just stealing living children. They were using dead ones, abandoned, unclaimed, invisible, to create the perfect lie. 14 years, Judge said quietly. How many children in 14 years? Possibly 30 to 40, Glitch answered. Dominic sat in the corner, Theo asleep against his chest. His eyes were fixed on nothing. His arms held his son like he would never let go again. Waverly understood now. This wasn't one bad person. This was a machine, a system within the system, and it had been running for over a decade. Spectre worked through the night. By dawn, 3 people sat in the warehouse. They had been found by club members, convinced by the urgency in their voices, and brought in carrying years of silence that finally had somewhere to go. The first was Marcus Delane, 58 years old, retired firefighter. I worked with Russ Thorne for 12 years, he said, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Something was always off about him. He was too quick to call time of death, too insistent that parents shouldn't see the bodies. I mentioned it to my captain once. What happened? Spectre asked. He told me I was jealous of Russ's efficiency. The second witness was Janine Holloway, 43, emergency room nurse. The night of the Mercer accident, Russ brought in 2 bodies, mother and son. He kept saying the father couldn't see them. Too traumatic, he said. She paused, her voice shaking. But I saw the boy's body bag. The injuries didn't match what we expected from that kind of crash. And the death certificate was already filled out when Russ arrived, signed by Leonard Marsh, before the body even reached the hospital. Did you report it? Judge asked. I told my supervisor. She said I was exhausted and imagining things. The third witness was Derek Okonkwo, 37, social worker. I was assigned to follow up with Dominic Mercer after the accident, widower support. But when I went to check the file, it was already closed. Case terminated in less than 48 hours. Signed off by my supervisor, Patricia Vance. He pulled out a folder. Vance has closed 23 similar cases in the past 5 years, all involving children, all closed casket funerals, all within 48 hours. Waverly listened from her corner. Each testimony was a piece of a puzzle, and the picture forming was a nightmare. Paramedics, medical examiners, social workers, each one a cog in the machine. What about the second funeral? Judge asked. Dominic held another ceremony 11 days ago. Did that trigger anything? Glitch raised his hand. Found it. 2 weeks ago, a local news station ran a story about Dominic. Grieving father holds closure ceremony. The article was shared over 4,000 times. 3 days later, a second death certificate was filed in the county system, signed by Leonard Marsh. They saw the coverage, Spectre said. They realized Dominic was still looking for answers, so they created more paperwork to reinforce the lie. Waverly spoke up. Her voice was quiet but steady. Theo saw that article too. Everyone looked at her. The people who had him showed it to him on a phone, a picture of his dad crying at the cemetery. They told him his father had forgotten him. That's why he ran. He thought it was his last chance. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The meeting happened at 3 in the morning. Theo was finally asleep in a back room, curled up on a cot with Dominic's jacket as a blanket. Dr. Nina checked on him every hour. 183 members packed into the main space. Waverly stood near the exit, unsure if she belonged, but unable to leave. Judge climbed onto a wooden crate so everyone could see him. Brothers, he began. We know who did this. We have names, addresses, patterns. We could ride out tonight and make sure these people never hurt another child. A rumble of agreement moved through the crowd. But, the word cut through the noise, if we do that, we go to prison. The case dies with us. The other children, the ones still out there, never come home. The rest of the network escapes and rebuilds somewhere else. Silence. I want blood as much as any of you, Judge continued. But Theo needs his father free. The other families need answers. And the only way to get both is to do this right. Document everything. Hand it to the FBI. Let the system that failed these kids fix its own mess. Or expose the whole thing if it refuses. Dominic stood up. His voice was rough from exhaustion and tears. My son is alive because a 17-year-old girl with nothing risked everything to tell me the truth. If she could do the right thing, so can we. Waverly felt heat rise to her cheeks. Judge raised his hand. Vote. Who supports taking this to federal authorities? One by one, arms went up. 183 votes, every single member. Waverly blinked back tears. She had grown up surrounded by lawyers and politicians who bought their way out of consequences. Her own father broke laws every day and called it business. And here, in a freezing warehouse, 183 people that the world called outlaws had just voted to trust the law. Spectre was already organizing teams. Glitch was compiling files. Someone mentioned a contact at the FBI, an agent named Diane Prescott who specialized in trafficking cases. The hunt was on. But this time they would do it by the book. The package delivered to FBI agent Diane Prescott weighed 4 pounds, 247 pages, photographs of every injury on Theo's body, recorded testimonies from 3 witnesses, financial records that Glitch had pulled from places he wouldn't name, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, deposits that didn't match salaries, spending patterns that made no sense for government employees. There were timelines, maps, charts connecting Leonard Marsh's signatures to Russell Thorne's death declarations. Records of unclaimed children's bodies that vanished from the morgue within days of each fake funeral. Agent Prescott was 51 years old. She had worked trafficking cases for 22 years. She had seen things that kept her awake at night. But when she finished reading the dossier, her hands were shaking. This is better than 95% of the cases that land on my desk, she told Judge. They met in a diner 30 miles outside Chicago, neutral ground. Your people did good work. We have a trauma surgeon who examined the boy, Judge said. We have witnesses who tried to report problems and got shut down. We have financial trails. What we don't have is time. Every day those people stay free is another day they can run. Prescott nodded. I need 48 hours, maybe less. I have to bring in my team, get warrants signed, coordinate with local police we can trust. How do you know which locals to trust? I don't use Chicago PD for this. State police, federal marshals, people with no connection to the county system. Judge slid a phone across the table. Burner, prepaid. Call me when you're ready to move. We'll stay out of your way, but we want to know when it happens. Prescott took the phone. The father, Dominic Mercer. How's he holding up? He hasn't slept in 3 days, won't let go of the boy for more than 5 minutes at a time. But he's keeping it together. And the girl, the one who found the kid? Judge paused. She's something else, 17 years old, living on the streets. Could have walked away 100 times. Didn't. Prescott studied him for a moment. You know who she is, don't you? Waverly Ashford, daughter of Preston Ashford, missing for almost a month, $50,000 reward for information. I know. Are you going to turn her in? Judge finished his coffee and stood up. She saved one of ours. That makes her one of ours. We don't turn in family. He walked out without looking back. Russell Thorne was washing his car when they came for him. 3 black SUVs, 8 federal agents. Weapons drawn. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He just stood there with a sponge in his hand, looking confused, like he couldn't understand how anyone had figured it out. They found a laptop in his house with encrypted files, names, dates, delivery locations. Thorne had kept records of everything, perhaps as insurance, perhaps out of habit. Either way, it was a gold mine. Dr. Leonard Marsh was arrested at the county morgue during his shift. He broke in less than 2 hours. Tears streaming down his face, he gave up every name he knew in exchange for the possibility of a lighter sentence. He had signed over 200 death certificates in 14 years. He knew they were fake. He did it anyway. Patricia Vance was arrested in her office at Child Protective Services. She said nothing, not one word. She asked for a lawyer and sat in silence while agents boxed up 14 years of case files. Officer Troy Saunders, the cop responsible for losing evidence in suspicious cases, ran. He made it 2 days. They found him in Indiana, 60 miles from the Canadian border, with $40,000 in cash and 3 fake passports. But those 4 were just the beginning. Marsh's confession led to 7 more arrests. A nurse who falsified medical records, a funeral home director who never asked questions, a county clerk who processed paperwork too fast, a judge who approved cremations without proper review. The network that had operated for 14 years was collapsing, and in the middle of it all, 5 children were recovered. 5 kids who had been declared dead. 5 families who had buried empty caskets or strangers' remains. 5 miracles pulled from the darkness. 2 more children were found with families who had no idea they were purchased. Those cases were complicated. Lawyers were involved. But the truth was coming out. Glitch called Dominic with updates every few hours. Thorne is talking now too. Trying to cut a deal, he's giving up the buyers. There's a list. Dominic listened while holding Theo's hand in the hospital room. How many names? 31 so far. We're talking about people in 4 states. This thing was bigger than anyone imagined. Dominic closed his eyes. 31 buyers. 31 people who had paid money for stolen children. The monster had many heads, but one by one they were cutting them off. Theo was admitted to Chicago Children's Memorial under federal protection. 2 Iron Verdicts members stood guard at every shift, 24 hours a day. No hospital staff entered the room without showing identification and being checked against an approved list. Dominic slept in a chair beside his son's bed. He held Theo's hand through blood draws and IV changes and the endless parade of specialists. The full diagnosis took 3 days to compile. Bilateral pneumonia. Grade 2 malnutrition. 3 fractures in his fingers that had healed at wrong angles and would need surgery to fix. Cigarette burns on his forearm in various stages of healing. Rope scars on both wrists. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Night terrors. Fear of closed doors. Panic attacks triggered by the smell of bleach. 7 months of captivity had left marks that would take years to fade. But Theo was alive, and every day brought small victories. On day 3, he ate solid food without vomiting. On day 4, he slept for 6 hours straight without screaming. On day 5, Glitch came to visit. He brought a tablet loaded with games and sat beside the bed. "Smart kids need to keep their brains busy," he said. "Want me to show you how to make a video game character move?" Theo watched with wide eyes as Glitch demonstrated simple coding, blocks of color, basic commands, cause and effect. For the first time since the warehouse, Theo smiled. It was small, fragile, like a flower pushing through concrete. But it was real. Dominic saw it from across the room. He turned away so his son wouldn't see him cry. Dr. Nina stopped by every evening after her hospital shift. "Children are resilient," she told Dominic one night while Theo slept. "More resilient than adults, honestly. He's going to carry scars. But with love, with stability, with time, he can have a good life, a normal life." "How do I make sure he feels safe?" Dominic asked. "How do I make him believe this is real? You're already doing it. You're here. Every time he opens his eyes, you're here. That's what he needs. Consistency, presence, proof that you're not going anywhere." Dominic nodded. He hadn't left the hospital in 5 days. He wouldn't leave until Theo did. Waverly sat alone in the hospital cafeteria. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She stared at the brown liquid without really seeing it. 3 weeks on the streets had taught her to savor warmth whenever she found it. But tonight she couldn't taste anything. She was waiting. For what, she didn't know. For someone to tell her it was time to leave. For the moment when she would become invisible again. "Girl, we need to talk." Judge stood across from her, holding his own cup of coffee. He sat down without asking permission. Waverly tensed. Here it comes, she thought. Thank you for everything. Now go away. How long since you ran away from home? The question caught her off guard. How do you? Glitch looked you up. Waverly Ashford, daughter of Preston Ashford, missing for 25 days, $50,000 reward for information. Waverly's blood turned to ice. I'm not going back. My father is. I know what your father is. Judge's voice was calm. Juvenile detention centers. Contracts with the state. Kids locked up for profit. You ran because you couldn't stomach the hypocrisy. Waverly said nothing. There was nothing to say. You saved Crow's son. That makes you family. And family doesn't sleep in the streets. He placed a piece of paper on the table. An address. Safe place. Rent paid for 6 months. No strings, no conditions. You take it or you don't. But the offer stands. Waverly stared at the paper. Why would you do this? Because you proved that money doesn't make a person, and courage doesn't need a last name. Judge stood up. We pay our debts, Waverly. You gave us back something we thought was gone forever. This is the least we can do. He walked away. Waverly sat there for a long time, the address burning in her hand. 2 weeks later, she moved in. The apartment was small but clean. Second floor of a brick building in Pilsen. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen with enough counter space to cook a real meal. A window that looked out on a tree that bloomed pink flowers in April. Waverly had hesitated for 2 weeks before accepting Judge's offer. Pride. Fear. A lifetime of being taught that nothing came without strings. But Dr. Nina had convinced her. Accepting help isn't weakness, she said, it's wisdom. Now, 5 months after moving in, Waverly had a life she never expected. She worked part-time at a community clinic. Nina's recommendation. Reception desk, filing, answering phones. Simple work that paid enough to cover groceries and save a little. She was studying again. GED prep classes 3 nights a week. After that, maybe college. Psychology, she thought, or social work. Something that would let her help kids like Theo. Her father was in the news constantly now. An anonymous tip to the Department of Justice had triggered a federal investigation into his detention centers. Waverly didn't know who sent it. She didn't ask. She hadn't spoken to Preston Ashford since the night she left. She didn't plan to. Her phone buzzed on a Saturday afternoon in August. Dominic's name on the screen. Theo wants to see you. Baseball game tomorrow. He's playing for the first time. He asked if you'd come. Waverly's chest tightened. I'll be there. She was. Theo stood at home plate in a uniform that was slightly too big. He swung at the first pitch and missed. Swung at the second and connected. The ball sailed over the shortstop's head. Theo ran to first base, his face lit up with pure joy. Waverly cheered until her throat hurt. The annual Iron Verdicts cookout happened on Judge's property. 5 acres outside Chicago. Trees on every side. Privacy from curious eyes. 200 people filled the space. Members, families, children running between picnic tables loaded with food. 7 months had passed since the warehouse. Waverly barely recognized the men around her. These were the same people she had seen in battle formation, faces hard, ready for war. Now they flipped burgers, chased toddlers, laughed at old jokes. Theo climbed onto a small wooden stage someone had built. He wore his baseball uniform. He had gained weight. Color had returned to his cheeks. The scars on his wrists had faded to thin white lines. I want to thank everyone, he said into a microphone. His voice was thin but steady. For finding me, for protecting me, for making the bad guys go to jail. The crowd listened in silence. Russell Thorne had been sentenced to 12 consecutive life terms. Leonard Marsh got 30 years. Patricia Vance got 22. Troy Saunders got 18. 7 others were in various stages of trial. 5 children had been recovered alive. Reforms were underway in the Illinois death verification system. And I want to thank Waverly, Theo continued. She found me when I was hiding. She gave me food. She was brave and told my dad even though she was scared. Waverly saved my life. 200 heads turned toward her. Judge stepped onto the stage. Waverly Ashford. His voice carried across the yard. The club voted. Unanimous decision. From today forward, when you're with us, your name is voice, because you spoke when everyone else stayed silent. Because you saw what no one wanted to see. Because you're one of ours. The applause started slowly, then built into thunder. Waverly let the tears fall. She had spent her whole life being seen for the wrong reasons. Now she was seen for something real. October sunlight poured through Waverly's window. She stood there watching the city below. Cars moving, people walking, life continuing the way it always did. On her desk sat the plastic Iron Man toy with chipped paint. Theo had given it back to her in the hospital. "You saved me," he had said. "You keep it." Beside the toy were stacked psychology textbooks, notes for her college admission test, a future taking shape one page at a time. Her phone buzzed, a message from Theo. "Game Saturday, cake after, you coming right?" She smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. Outside, the distant rumble of motorcycles, the brothers on their evening ride, flying together, protecting, living the code she had learned. See what others ignore. Speak when others stay silent. Never leave one behind. Waverly Ashford had run away from a mansion because she wanted to disappear. She found a boy because she became invisible. She saved a life because she chose to be seen when it mattered most. Now she had a new name, a chosen family, proof that miracles come from unexpected places, sometimes from a rich girl pretending to be poor, sometimes from a plastic toy in a torn pocket, sometimes from 6 words whispered in a frozen cemetery. "Your son is not dead, sir." She picked up the Iron Man, held it for a moment, then set it back down. Tomorrow she had class. Saturday was Theo's game. Sunday, maybe a ride with the club. Life continued, different, transformed, full of purpose. And if she ever found another child hiding in the dark, she knew exactly what to do. Speak, act, never look away. The window reflected her face for just a second. She was smiling. Outside, the sound of engines faded into the distance, carrying with them a promise that there would always be someone willing to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The end.